Think about the stories that really stick with you. They're powerful, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely.
And it's not just, family anecdotes. Look at the big players, Facebook, Google. I mean, they've built empires on these compelling narratives that connect billions.
Exactly. In today's world, we're just swimming in data,
Right.
right? A constant flood of information.
Yeah.
It's the well-crafted stories that really cut through all that noise, forge those deeper connections, and, ultimately push us to act.
Which brings us right to what we're diving into today. We're going to unpack the core principles of, truly effective storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, how to use it to convey a powerful vision and, spark real change. And our guide for this is Michael Margolis' book, 10X Story.
Right. And for anyone who hasn't come across it, 10X Story is really all about mastering the art of crafting what Margolis calls irrefutable stories.
Irrefutable stories. I like that.
Yeah, their narrative's so compelling, so expertly put together that they gain this almost undeniable quality. They clear the path for achieving even, really ambitious goals.
Exactly. And for you, listening in, someone who's looking to grasp important knowledge, quickly and thoroughly, our goal here is to pull out the essential insights from the book.
Get right to the heart of it.
Yeah, equip you with a real understanding of story power without getting too lost in the weeds. Okay, let's get into it.
So let's start with a really fundamental idea Margolis explores: the power of story versus just raw data, which is often underestimated.
He starts with a great example, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Referencing the author of the ZZ Tongjian. Now, maybe the name isn't immediately familiar.
Probably not to everyone, no.
But when you hear the story he tells breaking the jar to save a friend, that split-second childhood decision, suddenly, boom, there's a connection.
Yes.
It's that narrative that makes the person, the lesson, really memorable.
And what's fascinating there is how that simple story illustrates a really deep truth. Nothing resonates quite as deeply or stays with us as well as a story.
Mm-hmm.
Data, it can look like objective fact, right? But it often lacks that crucial emotional hook and the context. Story provides that.
And Margolis even brings in Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel laureate. He famously said, people don't make decisions based on numbers, they need a story. That really hits home, doesn't it? How we're wired for narrative.
It absolutely is, right? I mean, we all operate within limits: time, money, talent available.
Always.
And effective storytelling becomes this incredibly powerful tool to navigate those constraints, to inspire action, get support in ways pure data often just can't.
Yeah, but there's a really critical point here, isn't there? I mean, however captivating your story is, it has to be built on something real, a genuine foundation.
Oh, undeniably.
Yeah.
Margolis gives some pretty stark reminders of what happens when that foundation is missing. He points to figures like Elizabeth Holmes at Theranos,
Right.
and Billy McFarland of the Fire Festival fiasco.
Oh, yeah, Fire Festival. Wow.
Both conjured these incredibly alluring visions, right? But without real substance, without authentic execution, those dreams just collapsed. Big failures.
Yeah, Holmes, I remember she even adopted the whole Steve Jobs black turtleneck look.
Mm-hmm.
But it couldn't hide the fundamental flaws in her supposed revolutionary tech. And McFarlane's promise of this Lux Festival just became total chaos.
Exactly.
Those examples really drive home the captivating dream isn't enough on its own.
They really highlight the vital point that, okay, yes, you need a solid business model, a strong market strategy, absolutely essential.
Sure.
But it's the powerful and crucially authentic story that lets you present your vision in a way that truly connects, gains momentum. It's about making that vision feel, undeniably true and achievable.
Okay, so we get the power of story. Now, how do we actually craft one that, hits the mark?
Mm-hmm.
Margolis introduces this idea called the 9 out of 10 test. What's that about?
The 9 out of 10 test is sort of a practical benchmark, a way to gauge your story's potential impact. Basically, it asks, can you frame your message so the vast majority of your audience, let's say 9 out of 10 people, will nod along, agree, accept what you're saying?
9 out of 10. That's a high bar.
It is. And then he presents these two really interesting metaphors for approaching this. The hammer versus the ice cream. Can you unpack that a bit?
Sure. The hammer represents a forceful, disruptive approach. As innovators, right, there's often this natural urge to point out what's wrong now and how your idea just smashes that old way.
Like Apple's famous 1984 ad.
Very hammer.
Exactly. That feeling of rebellion, shaking things up, challenging the status quo. Very powerful in some contexts.
But then you have the ice cream, which symbolizes a more inviting, engaging approach.
Guess who doesn't like ice cream?
Right. It evokes positive feelings, curiosity, maybe a desire for more. Margolis suggests that while disruption might be baked into innovation, leading with a positive, relatable message is often more effective for bringing a wider audience along. So the hammer might work for the early adopters, the rebels.
Yeah, those who thrive on disruption. But the ice cream approach, often better for broader adoption, for building that lasting buy-in. Think about maybe Tesla. Initially, more hammer, challenging the old auto industry,
Right.
but then shifting more towards ice cream, marketing the aspirational lifestyle, the green benefits to reach more people.
So it's about attracting rather than attacking, kind of. Instead of telling people they're wrong, which, let's be honest, nobody likes.
Nobody.
You're offering them something appealing, something desirable.
Precisely. People naturally resist being told they're incorrect or that their beliefs are flawed. It just puts up walls.
Yeah.
Effective storytelling, Margolis argues, kind of transcends that right-wrong thing. It's about crafting a narrative that resonates so deeply it fosters agreement and leads to real impact.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now, why is it so hard to tell those really disruptive stories effectively, the ones that challenge fundamental ways of thinking?
That's a really crucial question. Margolis explains that truly innovative ideas often struggle in articulation because, well, they tend to be big, complex,
Right.
and they can fundamentally challenge people's core beliefs, their worldview. And this can trigger what he calls a defensive immune response.
Like the brain just throws up a shield, says, nope, don't like that.
Exactly. When our core beliefs feel threatened, we instinctively resist. Plus, disruptive tech often redefines our very concept of reality. Think about the internet when it first emerged.
Yeah, trying to explain that to someone.
Right. It can be incredibly hard for audiences to fully grasp the future you're describing when it's just so radically different from their current reality. The mental leap is huge.
It's like describing color to someone born blind. The reference points aren't there.
A good analogy. And while we often celebrate visionary leaders now, Margolis reminds us they are often seen as, well, heretics in their day.
Troublemakers.
Yeah, challenging the norms. He argues that today, though, there's a better way, a more strategic, effective path to transformative change than just sheer force of will or, martyrdom.
Okay, so if we really master this new way of narrating, as he calls it, what can these irrefutable stories actually do for us? What are the concrete benefits?
Well, mastering this approach, according to Margolis, unlocks this powerful ability to inspire and influence, a level of impact that can be truly transformative. He even cites Forbes calling storytelling the single most important business skill for the future.
Wow. Number one, that really says something.
It does. He explains how a compelling business narrative becomes the very foundation for conveying your vision, your strategy, the path forward.
Crucial for leadership.
Absolutely crucial for aligning and motivating employees in a way that just, hitting OKR's objectives and key results, often it doesn't achieve.
Because numbers alone don't really stir passion, do they? Or create that shared sense of purpose.
Exactly right. Effective storytelling helps managers shift from just directing tasks to truly leading people. And Margolis lists a whole range of benefits: securing crucial resources, fostering real collaboration across teams, overcoming resistance to change, which is always tough, establishing yourself as a thought leader in your field, things like that.
It sounds like an essential superpower almost for anyone trying to make a real impact. Now, early on, Margolis touches on a slight difference between story and narrative. Is that important for us to keep in mind?
It's a subtle distinction, but yeah, it's useful. While story is the term we all know and use,
Right.
Margolis uses narrative more to mean the underlying framework that delivers the real impact. Think of the narrative as the deeper structure, the meaning behind the story beats.
Okay.
But he also admits that for simplicity, in everyday chat, story usually works just fine. So we'll probably stick mostly with story.
Got it. That's helpful. Now, let's dig into this idea of moving from outsider to insider. How does our own personal journey, our experiences, factor into crafting a powerful story?
This is where Margolis really stresses the crucial element of building genuine rapport. Trust between the speaker and the audience.
Yeah.
You're essentially asking people to connect with you, to buy into your vision. So the basic question becomes, who are you? And why should they listen?
And he introduces this really compelling idea of the superhero origin story. I found that quite insightful. How does understanding our own journey become a strength?
Think about your favorite superheroes, right? Batman, Spider-Man, Wonder Woman.
Mm-hmm.
They all have these origin stories that explain not just their powers, but their core motivations, why they do what they do.
Like Bruce Wayne seeing his parents killed.
Yeah.
That fuels everything.
Exactly. Understanding your own defining moments, the struggles you've overcome, that can be a profound source of authenticity, a powerful way to connect with others. It shows where you're coming from.
It's about finding the emotional core of our own experiences.
Precisely. And Margolis talks about how innovators often feel like outsiders, people who just see the world differently.
Yeah, that resonates.
He reframes this feeling, though, not as a disadvantage, but as a unique and valuable perspective. A gift, really, that can enrich your storytelling.
He even says something like, teach what we need to learn. That really struck me.
Yes. The idea is that the very things that maybe made you feel different, like an outsider, those could actually be your greatest strengths in communication and creation. Your unique lens lets you see solutions others might miss.
So it's about embracing those experiences, even the tough ones, as part of our narrative.
Absolutely. And this is important, Margolis stresses narrating those struggles in a way that shows meaningful growth, learning, not just portraying yourself as a victim.
Right, taking ownership of the story.
Exactly. That allows you to connect on a much deeper, more relatable level.
He references Jim Signorelli's idea about people hiding their best personal stories under a dry resume. Just a list of events, no emotion.
That's such a vivid picture, isn't it? So true. Signorella points out how many people just give the facts, the career steps, and miss the crucial emotional depth that actually resonates.
The why behind the what.
Exactly. Margolis urges us to uncover those more personal, emotional stories, the why, and skillfully weave them into our business narratives.
To inject that human element, that depth, that makes the vision feel more tangible, more real, and maybe more attainable for others.
Precisely. It powerfully shows the personal journey, the motivation, and it makes the new possibilities you're talking about feel more grounded, authentic, and emotionally resonant.
Okay, so we connect through our origins, our struggles. What about positivity? Margolis talks about the feel-good principle. What's that?
The feel-good principle is really fundamental to human psychology, and Margolis emphasizes it a lot. Basically, as humans, we're naturally drawn to things that make us feel good.
Makes sense.
And we tend to avoid things that cause pain or discomfort. It's a basic biological drive that shapes how we process information, how we decide things.
He uses that Heineken ad, the one during a really politically charged football match, as an example. I remember that.
That's a perfect illustration. In a super tense, divided moment, the ad cleverly found common ground. Focused on shared humanity, created a positive feeling that cut through the politics.
Yeah, it was quite effective.
It brilliantly shows the power of finding commonalities, generating positive emotions as a way to bridge divides, foster connection.
Which is quite different from a lot of traditional storytelling, which he mentions often aim to reinforce the existing social order, right?
Exactly. For centuries, many dominant stories serve to reinforce norms, warn against deviating. Modern storytelling, though, often challenges those rules, encourages different thinking, different ways of being.
So understanding this feel-good principle becomes really key when we're trying to introduce disruptive ideas, things that challenge people.
Absolutely critical. By understanding how our brains react to positive versus negative stimuli, we can strategically craft stories that are much more likely to be met with acceptance, engagement, rather than resistance and rejection.
Create that psychological safety.
Yes, and highlight the potential upsides, the positive outcomes.
Okay, speaking of the brain, let's dive into that a bit more. What does Margolis say about how our brains actually respond when we hear stories?
Well, first, he warns against leading with pure data, as we talked about, because it can often trigger skepticism, that primal fight or flight response.
Right.
He quotes Kevin Roberts, who said, "Emotion leads to action. Reason leads to conclusions," which really underscores how emotion drives us.
That really flips the usual business presentation model on its head, doesn't it?
Sure.
Starting with the numbers is so often the default.
It absolutely does. Instead of just throwing data out first, Margolis suggests starting with maybe a timeless truth, a universal principle, something relatable.
Okay.
Then pose questions about that truth in the context of our changing world. This helps build common ground before you introduce complex or challenging info.
And what's actually happening neurobiologically in our brains?
It's fascinating. Margolis explains that when we encounter a problem or a threat in a story, our attention snaps into focus. That triggers adrenaline, that jolt of energy, heightened alertness.
Heart races, senses sharpen.
Exactly. But if the threat persists or escalates in the story, the brain kicks into the next stage, releasing cortisol, the stress hormone.
Mm-hmm.
Now, cortisol prepares us for sustained action, but prolonged exposure. That can lead to defensiveness, anxiety, resistance, shutting down.
Definitely not the state we want our audience in when we're trying to persuade them about something new.
Precisely. And this is where that feel-good principle loops back in biologically. Margolis introduces oxytocin, often called the trust or love hormone.
Oxytocin.
Stories that focus on connection, empathy, shared values. Research shows they stimulate oxytocin release. This fosters a sense of safety, trust, and makes the audience more receptive.
So stories about shared humanity, common goals,
Yeah,
they can actually make people more psychologically open to considering challenging ideas.
that's the key insight. Plus, Margolis talks about mirror neurons. Crucial role.
Mirror neurons.
Yeah, when we read or hear vivid stories, our brains actually create these internal simulations of the events, the emotions being described. We kind of mentally act it out. This leads to a powerful sense of shared experience, empathy with the characters. He quotes Lisa Cron, who says, "When we really engage with a story, we essentially become the protagonist. We feel their feelings, live their journey."
That explains why we get so invested in fictional characters. Our brains are literally living the story with them.
Exactly. And Margolis emphasizes this applies to all communities, companies, organizations too. Shared stories are the very fabric holding us together, creating that sense of belonging.
It really does all seem to come down to the stories we tell ourselves and the ones we share.
Precisely. He concludes that the value we assign to pretty much everything in life is based on the stories we create around them, which makes storytelling, a profoundly powerful tool in the 21st century.
Okay, so this idea that big narrative beats big data. What exactly does Margolis mean by that? It sounds catchy, but what's underneath?
Well, he highlights that just having lots of data doesn't mean you know how to tell its story effectively. He uses examples of common marketing metrics, MRR, NPS, COCA, CLV.
Right, the acronym SOUP.
Exactly. Those numbers are important for tracking things, sure. But on their own, they lack meaning, impact. They need a narrative to give them context.
They're just abstract figures on a page until you weave that story around them. Explain why they matter.
Precisely. Margolis repeats that classic idea. Humans buy with emotion, then justify with logic. So context and that emotional resonance, absolutely crucial for influencing behavior, driving action. If the audience doesn't connect emotionally with the story behind the data, the numbers alone won't persuade or stick.
He even mentions how sometimes really big, overwhelming narratives, like around climate change, can backfire.
Yes, that's a sharp point. The sheer scale and potential consequences of something like climate change can, unfortunately, trigger that fight, flight, or freeze response.
Means people feel helpless, maybe tune out.
Right. Disengagement, even denial. He suggests that focusing on more local, personal connections, things we directly care about, can often be a more effective initial way to engage people.
Make it feel more relatable. Empower action on a smaller scale first.
Exactly. He reinforces that context and emotion are really the king and queen here, and emotion often leads the way in fostering acceptance, belief.
So, data isn't bad.
Not at all, but it's often not the best starting point, especially if you're talking to a potentially resistant or skeptical audience.
So mastering that art of connecting emotionally is key to making your case compelling.
Absolutely. He quotes Anat Shenker-Osorio, who famously said, "Data numb, jargon jars, nobody ever marched on Washington because of a pie chart."
That really nails it.
It powerfully shows that emotional connection is the real catalyst for action, for movement.
And when we're presenting change, disruption, Margolis advises using approaches that foster connection, evoke positive feelings, offer genuine hope for the future.
Exactly. Paint that compelling, desirable vision of what's possible through the change, rather than just focusing on the problems now.
Okay, that leads us neatly into the first big step in building these stories, see it, which is about understanding the context of change. What does that involve?
Well, Margolis talks about the shifting structure of belonging in our digital age, how people increasingly find communities, identities online around shared interests, values. He uses an example, maybe a big social media platform. Huge user base, but maybe even its own employees don't fully grasp its core purpose.
It really highlights how the whole landscape of connection has changed so dramatically.
Profoundly. And Margolis emphasizes that tons of companies, even those selling physical products, are operating in this fast-changing digital environment. Understanding this context is crucial for communicating effectively today.
He also makes a really important point about perspective.
Yeah.
How what feels natural, even exciting, to the person initiating change, might feel totally different, unsettling even, to the audience.
Exactly. What you see as a great opportunity, your audience might initially see as a crisis, a threat to their status quo. Being aware of that difference is vital.
So you shouldn't just charge in challenging their worldview.
No, he advises against that, especially right at the start. Instead, offer something relatable, trustworthy first. Build a bridge.
Show them the destination, yes, but also help them see a clear, understandable path to get there.
Precisely. He explains stories have a dual role. Positioning device, helping people see where they fit in this new picture.
Okay.
And transport vehicle, showing where you're going. And crucially, if they want to come along,
Yeah.
helping them locate themselves in your narrative is essential.
And change. It's almost always part of a compelling story, isn't it?
Absolutely. Change is the only constant, right? And stories are inherently about transformation. The key, Margolis argues, is to be the messenger of good news about the change.
Focus on the benefits.
Yeah, emphasize the opportunities, the positive possibilities that triggers oxytocin, good feelings, rather than just focusing on threats or problems, which activates cortisol and resistance.
He uses the example of that Nokia CEO, Stephen Elop, and his burning platform memo. That was vivid, all right, but maybe not motivating in the right way.
It was definitely dramatic. Framing it as this dire emergency, Margolis suggests that while that grabs attention, it can also be deeply demotivating, fearful. Instead, he advocates giving people tangible reasons to believe in the positive future, not just urging them to leap off a burning platform out of sheer panic.
Paint that inspiring picture of a better place.
Exactly. And he wraps up this section with that great Will Wheaton quote, "Everyone is the hero of their own story. Try not to be the villain in someone else's."
That's good. Really highlights the need for empathy, understanding their perspective.
Absolutely.
Which leads us straight to step 2. Feel it. This is all about creating emotional tension in the narrative. Why is the emotional piece so critical?
Well, Margolis puts it bluntly. It's incredibly hard, maybe impossible, to sell a vision of the future if your audience is actually scared or anxious about it.
Makes sense.
He uses an example of a Silicon Valley customer service startup to illustrate this.
So even if your tech is helpful, if the message triggers fear somehow, it's going to struggle.
Exactly. He stresses how important it is to deeply understand and focus on your audience's desired outcomes, their frustrations, their pain points. Ask, who is the hero here whose life you're dramatically improving?
What do they really want? What's stopping them?
Precisely. What are their core aspirations and what obstacles are in their way right now?
He tells an interesting story about an executive team building a new campus. Initially, they thought the end consumer was the hero.
Right, but then they realized they didn't actually have much direct control over that narrative.
So they shifted.
Yeah, they smartly shifted focus to their internal design team, the people they could directly impact and empower through the project. Finding the right hero, the one in your sphere of influence whose journey you can truly tell, is crucial.
And Margolis brings in this powerful idea that difficulties, challenges, they actually inspire us, drive growth.
Yes, he quotes William Ellery Channing. "Difficulties exist in order to rouse, not discourage, the human spirit to grow strong by conflict." He explains that creating conflict for your character is essential to make the story engaging, compelling.
It's that classic screenwriting formula, right? Who wants what? What's stopping them?
Exactly. Conflict creates tension, drives the story forward, and makes the hero's journey much more relatable and impactful. Margolis also talks about the power of internal conflict.
Within the character.
Yeah, that creates really compelling, nuanced characters. Even anti-heroes like Walter White in Breaking Bad, we relate to their struggles.
Characters grappling with their own flaws, moral dilemmas.
Precisely. He does caution, though, against relying too heavily on the simple hero, victim, villain setup.
Why is that?
It can often feel too simplistic, miss the complexities of the real world. Instead, he advises focusing on the character's desires and the obstacles, internal and external, they face.
Because, as he points out with Julian Assange as an example, one person's hero can easily be another's villain. It depends on your perspective.
That's a perfect illustration of the complexity. What one group sees as heroic, another condemns. It highlights why considering multiple perspectives is so important when crafting narratives.
So it's about creating relatable avatars for our audience by truly understanding their desires, the emotional tensions they feel.
Absolutely. Your emotional reality as the storyteller has to connect deeply with the audience's emotional reality, and that takes research, real empathy, understanding their hopes, their fears.
He even suggests dedicating serious time, like 30 days, to this character research phase. and gives questions to guide it.
Yes, questions focused on uncovering desires, fears, internal contradictions, unmet needs. Delving that deep lets you craft a story that truly resonates on a profound level.
And leveraging the central paradox the character faces
Hmm.
that makes it feel authentic.
Exactly. It's often those internal struggles, those complexities and contradictions that make characters feel real and their journeys compelling and believable.
Okay, finally we get to the third step.
Yeah.
Trust it. The truth revealed. How do we build that essential trust within the narrative?
This final step is all about providing compelling, credible evidence. You need to make your story believable and ultimately inspire action.
Right.
So you've painted the picture, connected emotionally. Now you have to show that this future isn't just desirable, but actually attainable.
Back up the vision with proof.
Precisely. And Margolis gives a whole list, 15 potential sources of evidence. Things like historical data, expert opinions, analogies, testimonials, personal anecdotes, lots of options.
So you choose what fits best.
Exactly. The key is figuring out what kind of proof will resonate most strongly, most persuasively with your specific audience.
He tells that funny story about the school class fostering animals and his childhood wish for a 15-foot boa constrictor.
Huh, yes. That really highlights the need for credible justification, especially when you're proposing something that seems, well, a bit out there.
You can't just rely on enthusiasm.
No, it underscores how important it is to proactively address potential objections, to really truth test your narrative, anticipate the doubts, and have convincing answers ready.
Okay, so bringing all these pieces together, see it, feel it, trust it.
Mhm.
Margolis talks about actively building narrative intelligence. What does that mean?
Narrative intelligence, or NQ, is essentially the ability to understand the world, to interpret events through the lens of stories.
Seeing the stories everywhere.
Exactly. And it's also the ability to recognize different story patterns, anticipate how audiences will react, and then strategically craft and use your own stories for maximum impact. It's becoming fluent in the language of story.
Sounds like a pretty crucial skill for today's world.
Absolutely. Margolis recaps the 3 steps. See it, context, feel it, emotion, trust it, evidence as the foundation. He emphasizes the trend towards personalization in business and how understanding yourself, your own values, lets you communicate them clearly through story.
He circles back to the feel-good principle again, too, building that positive momentum.
Yes, and he revisits the neurobiology acceptance versus defensiveness, the role of oxytocin, mirror neurons, reminding us how they help foster connection, empathy, understanding. It's about creating that psychologically safe space for your message.
And it's not about forcing your view,
Yeah.
but respectfully welcoming the audience into a new possibility.
Exactly. And positioning your customer, your audience, as the hero of the story, understanding their journey, empowering them. That's key.
Margolis also touches on how we find our permission to build and share news stories. How do we do that?
Often it comes down to leveraging your sphere of influence, whether you're a CEO shaping the whole company narrative or in a more focused role. It's about finding where a better story, clearer messaging can make a real difference within your reach.
And ultimately, narrative intelligence isn't just about broadcasting, is it? It's two-way.
Precisely. Margolis references Steve Denny's definition, which stresses it's not just telling your stories well, but also actively listening to and understanding your audience's stories and anticipating their reactions. That's the real test of leadership today.
He even shares a personal bit about how putting his own story out there online led to unexpected connections.
Yeah, it's a great example of how vulnerability, authenticity can build real relationships in our hyper-connected world. Sharing your narrative intentionally invites others to connect on a human level.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the absolute core takeaways from 10X Story?
I think the key insights really circle around, first, the fundamental power of story over just data. Second, the critical need to deeply understand your audience, their perspective, their emotions. Third, the huge influence of that feel-good principle in fostering acceptance.
And we also touched on how our brains actually respond to narrative, the hormones involved.
Right, the neurobiology. And then those 3 crucial steps for crafting the stories. See it, establish the context, feel it, create emotional tension and connect. And trust it, provide that compelling, credible evidence.
And finally, that overarching concept of narrative intelligence NQ, the ability to understand, create, and use stories strategically to inspire, influence, and drive real change.
Exactly. Mastering these principles, these interconnected ideas, can genuinely transform how you convey your visions and achieve, well, maybe even those 10X goals.
So for you, listening, here's something to think about. How can you start applying these principles in your own work, in your life? How might focusing more consciously on the emotional connections in your narratives make your ideas truly undeniable? And maybe, just maybe, take a look at those 15 sources of evidence Margolis list. Which ones could really strengthen the stories you need to tell? It's about unlocking that 10x potential in your own story.